Apparently, it's funny when I rant about stuff that pisses me off. Generally, when I do these, I'm talking about like books I like, things I'm into collect. Very positive bent. So right here, we're going to get a little bit negative, and I'm going to show a collection of books that I have that I refer to as my wall of shame. These are books that I have read that I absolutely loathed, and I loathe them so much that sometimes I've purchased physical copies for the sheer purpose of setting them aside and shaming them together. So we're going to get really negative here. I'm going to talk about books that just like I could scream about, but I'm just going to talk briefly about each one. This is what I have assembled for my personal wall of shame. They're not all the right way up. I imagine that there's going to be some disagreement here because some of these authors are in fact popular, a very loyal cult following. Not trying to alienate anybody, but the book you like, I hate it. So starting right off, and what is probably going to be the most divisive of my picks here. This is one I read with a friend the other year. This is Jim Butcher, Stormfront, the first book of the Dresden Files, the wizard Harry Dresden, or whatever he is. These are exceedingly popular. Somebody watching this is probably a fan of these and shaking their head. You see, this is a scene on Sci-Fi because there was that short-lived television series from it too, which I've also seen the pilot of, and I didn't much care for. These are very beloved. I keep running the fans of these. It's a first-person narration like a detective story, and like a lot of detective stories, it's about a clever man. It's about a smart fella. He's wicked smart. He could be affable and goofy, which is welcome, but, it's also really sexed up. I'm not necessarily a prude. Everybody has their thing, everybody has their thing they want to sock it to. Jim Butcher here, and Harry Dresden are very hetero, so they couldn't sock it to me. He's sort of a white knight character. Is that he reveres women. He doesn't degrade them. But that also results in women appearing and him objectifying them in his descriptions. And you can read that any way you like. I kind of rolled my eyes on the whole thing. My friend pointed out that there's actually pacing issues in there. Because there's parts where the writer and then therefore the reader sort of zone out. It's like, why is this happening here and now? For some reason he winds up naked quite a bit. That's part of the whole, why I mentioned sex especially. Like, sex is an element in everything. It's very on the surface here. He winds up naked quite a bit, because it's quote-unquote funny. Except when the writer puts in something funny, he might not necessarily be laughing. So there's annoying turns of phrase in there at some points. Like the guy he's pursuing, who's another, wizard type. Towards the end, he starts calling him Shadow Man, out of nowhere. No, not for me. So, speaking of series, and sex, by the way, also, again, I'm not a prude. These are John Norman's Gore series. Now, this one, there's probably going to be a lot of people more nodding along with me than shaking their heads, because the Gore series really ran afoul. These were started in the mid-'60s. They're knockoffs of the Burroughs Mars series, that's more or less admitted. These ran afoul of feminism when it was on a really important wave for feminism. Back when they were calling it women's lib. This redhead guy, Tarl Cabot, not Carl Talbot, but Tarl, T-A-R-L, Cabot. Daw also had a series of these. So these are famously, it's kind of like Laurel K. Hamilton, where it started off more or less as an innocuous genre example, and then at some point it just became outright porno. Tarl Cabot there is abducted from Earth by a flying saucer and taken to Gore, which is counter-Earth. It's a planet just like Earth, the same size, on the opposite side of the sun, so its orbit, Earth doesn't know it exists. And everybody there, wears thongs and fights with swords, and guns aren't allowed, and there's these evil insectoid aliens called priest kings and stuff. That's what this third one, Anyway, Outlaw Gore is among the worst books I've ever actually finished. It was, by the way, they're both adapted very unfaithfully to films by Golan Globus in the late 80s. Those are bad for different reasons. But basically, Tarl Cabot, enslaves women. Does the have sex to them quite a bit. Not so much in the first couple of books, but more as the series went on. Apparently by book 6, it's just born. But I finished book 2. I could not finish book 3. I got about halfway through this, and I got really tired of Norman's scholarly language. He's a professor, actually. I forget the guy's real name right now. It's almost a parody of itself, but, not for the yucks, because the guy takes this philosophical point of view to the fact that he's writing, pornographic fantasy, more or less. Because it's all basically like women want to be slaves. That's his whole notion. And so that all the adventure stuff is just sort of a digression, and the real core of the whole thing is that women want men to rape them. The writing wasn't good enough to support that or anything else. It was really poorly written. Like all of them, all the dialogue is attributed. It's all he said, reported repeatedly. Everybody speaks really stiffly and woodenly, and in the later ones there's lines like "earn your rape." It's bad on many levels. This one is actually it's not a novelization, it's a sequel to a novelization. So the original The Omen series, there was The Omen in 1976, there was Damien The Omen 2 in 1978, then 81 there was The Final Conflict, in which Sam Neill played the adult Damien, the Antichrist. The first movie in the series is brilliant. It's by Richard Donner, who did Lethal Weapon and the first Superman in 1978. The first movie's really good. The second one's nearly all right. The third one's pretty messy. This is by a guy named Gordon McGill. It says right there, from the author of The Omen 3, because he wrote the novelization of The Final Conflict. So this is a direct sequel to that. The woman who stabs Damien with one of the sacred daggers at the end of that movie, like she had a baby by him and didn't know she was pregnant, and she winds up dying in childbirth, giving birth to the next Antichrist. And it's Armageddon 2000. This is just terrible. So it takes place in the year 2000, but it's not a science fiction novel. It's meant to be some kind of horror. So they don't really attempt many predictions, right? There's nothing futuristic in it. Like, a couple go for a drive, and they're putting cassettes in their cassette deck. Now, this book was written, I think it was 82 or 83. Yeah, 82. The compact disc already existed. It wasn't in wide use, but it did exist. If you watch, like, movies from 1982, they're set in the future. People listening to music on chips or orbs or stuff like that. You know, like, they try to predict something. They just have a tape deck. A lot of people had a tape deck in the year 2000. I had a tape deck in the year 2000. But when you're predicting the future, you don't really go with that kind of thing. Like, and if you do, it's like Captain Picard having, like, a book of Shakespeare on his desk, or somebody whipping out like an Edison cylinder. The plot is a series of boring Omen-style killings. On one of them, this lady who worked for the Antichrist, she gets absolution before she dies. In the text, it tells you in no uncertain terms that she went to heaven. If you make a thing about the Antichrist, you're basically, whatever your beliefs may be, you're writing a Christian-centric universe, Judeo-Christian kind of thing. And so, like, is it really frightening if you have a story where the victims of the demon just like go to paradise? Is it? Okay, so she goes to a church that's being demolished, and a concrete Christ falls on her, and she gets impaled on, like the hands, I guess. And it says, like, oh, by the way, she went straight to heaven. This also, but I guess this is going to be a theme, and this also has a weird distracting sex thing, and that the main character's wife is like a hornball and wants to, like, role play with him all the time, which is supposed to, like, make us feel, unsettled or something like that. I don't know. It's really, really bad sketch characterization. It's like a lot of paperback writing from the 70s and the 80s, where they have things that are supposed to be relatable and sort of frank, but they all just come off really cheap and chintzy, and they're all just sort of like, it's like the character was a paper doll and they added some glitter on it, or the crayon on a smile. Like, that's how good it is. Like, there's nothing especially effort intensive. I mean, the guy writes novelizations, though, so what should I expect? Anyway. Speaking of very, very popular people, as I was previously, Robert Ludlum, being assisted by Gail Lynds, he, like, died the year this book came out, or maybe a year later. So this is kind of like James Patterson stuff, where Ludlum's writing like a synopsis or a draft, an outline, and it's being completed by somebody else. Now, I never liked Robert Ludlum. I never liked The Bourne Identity, like the films. I've never actually read a Ludlum book, or, other than this one. I did not finish this book. I'm not going to tell you why I didn't finish this book, because this book is garbage. I actually, years ago, saw a 3-hour TV film of this. I think it had Stephen Dorff or somebody like that. And I couldn't tell you two things about it. Nothing to mentally engage with in this. So this is another thing where it's like, there's a conspiracy where, like, some evil guy in some corporation, like, has discovered this especially rare virus, and he's going to inflict it on the world, and his company's going to profit by being the only ones who have the cure. And it's like, yeah, corporate shenanigans exist. They get a little bit tiresome as the basis for adventure fiction. You may remember in the 1990s, virtually all the conspiracy, things were about evil corporations, so this falls in line with that. And I lived in the 90s. Obviously, I'm in my mid-30s now. There were some instances of that that were especially embarrassing and dated, but I don't really think of them that way. I think of the 90s as current. But reading this, like, I was embarrassed for that time period. It's like Sandra Bullock in The Net. It's like, so there's a character who's like this especially great hacker. He has, like, autism or something, right? And so the book has to take pains to explain to you what computers are, what the internet is, what hacking is, what autism is. The main character is talking about the hacker thing to, like, the lady interest, and she's like, oh, what's wrong with him? Oh, well, he's got this F disease, and it's like, and autism's characterized not that way anymore. Boring as shit. It's supposed to be about this retired spy guy, like, going rogue to try to find the conspiracy that killed his girlfriend. His girlfriend takes like 10 chapters to die. and she's not even really a character. The prose is like stereo instructions, and there's attempts at emotional flourishes, which are embarrassing, clash very badly with it. We got David Weber on Basilisk Station. This is the first Honor Harrington book. I could make an entire video. I could probably talk for 3 hours about what's wrong with this book. I actively hate this book, and you know, this is again a popular and long-running series, and it's really hard to see what people were getting into here. This was 93. Yeah, again, you know, a time period that I don't tend to read books from. It's taking great pains to make a future that's sort of like the British Navy, and I guess like the 18th or early 19th centuries. And so there's a lot of scientific jargon. There was a lot of technobabble in there to explain why the spaceships have to move the same way a ship of the line would move at that time. Sea battles are two-dimensional, space battles should be three-dimensional, but they're two-dimensional because of something about energy shield. It takes great pains to explain energy shields. That's a minor thing, like he could have written around that if it wasn't for the fact that his main character, Honor Harrington, is just like, she's awful. So she's continuously, we're told in the prose, third-person prose, she's continuously delighted by things. She's delighted by her cat Nimitz here, which is this weird psychic alien cat with hands that likes celery. And she's always just like giddy over him. She's giddy over being a space commander. She's giddy over spaceships. She's giddy over militarism. She's giddy over being virtually British. All the planets have names like basilisks and like Manticore. It was going with the theme. Mostly, she's hanging out on her spaceship, not doing anything, except for like browbeating her crew into doing things without really helping them do them. They'll be like Captain Sir, who's a woman, I need really help making these probes you said to make. Can you help me? And Honor Harrington here's like, nah, you do it. We're supposed to admire her because she's bringing out the best in her crew by being a dick. Virtually nothing happens for a lot of it. We get a backstory about her, about how she was almost raped one time, but she's a badass, so she kicked his ass. There's something about some drug conspiracy on some planet, somebody stirring up the natives. It's just dull as dishwater, man. It made me pine for the worst Star Trek episode or film was better than this. Again, this is along the lines of the Dresden one. This has a lot of the same problems. This is Hounded by Kevin Hearn, the Iron Druid Chronicles, and spin-offs and all that. Like this is something that is beloved. So, there's this guy in this town in Arizona who is immortal. He is a druid. He's extra special Irish. And there are all these immortal beings and gods that show up, women, and they all want him. Like, they all want him. They're into him. They're super into him. He's supposed to be hot. He is a psychic dog. Oh, I see that psychic animal theme continuing from on Basilisk Station. He's a psychic dog who he converses with. He's a druid, so he can turn into a dog sometimes in other animal forms. He has friends that are werewolves and lawyers. A trifle sexed up. It's not so much that it's sexed up. It's like it's the hero that everybody wants. Like, terrible trope. It's like when you make a hero who is powerful, overpowered, likable, and liked, and people all want his body. Like, that's a trifle masturbatory, don't you think? I felt like the prose did not support it. It's better than a lot of the books that are featured here, but certainly better than on the Basilisk Station. It's certainly not for me. I found it very indulgent without anything that I would consider to be payoff. Because mostly it's a guy going to work, coming home, talking to his dog, being sometimes threatened by cops, and then there's some evil magic thing. Okay, book. This is actually the book I joined Goodreads to review. That's how much I hated this book. This is Robert Moore Williams. Pretty sure he created Jongor, who was kind of like a Tarzan knockoff. This is Xanthar of the Many Worlds. This is again the first in the series. There were 4 of these. This came out, I think it was 1967. Here's what's bad about this. This is kind of like a little bit like what Lynn Carter does. This author, Robert Moore Williams, took elements from the kind of books that I love. He took a little bit from Edgar Rice Burroughs. For example, it's a guy who goes to another planet. You see, he's got a copper hammer there. Right? So instead of a gun, he's fighting with, old-timey melee weapons and shit. It's like, muscly guy goes to planet and kicks ass, just like Edgar Rice Burroughs and sometimes Robert E. Howard. It's called Xanthar, like a little bit Conan, like really mannish, like primitive-sounding name. It's his actual name. He's from Earth, but he's Professor Xanthar. It's his last name, not his first name. He's taking on this Yellow Peril-type villain named Fu Kong. And I just got a giggle when I found out there was a villain named Fu Kong. It's like, he's so Fu Kong awesome. But he's not. Nothing is. This book is terrible. Robert Moore Williams had been writing since the late 30s. He'd been in the game quite some time. But So he employed a lot of really old themes here, like, so there's some Sax Rohmer, there's some H.P. Lovecraft, like, he borrowed from a lot of camps, like there's Elder Gods and stuff, but he completely bungles it. Xanthar is only in the book about a third of the time, because we keep cutting back to Fukong, and we keep cutting back to two of Professor Xanthar's students, being Laurel Ponder and Red Cornish, who were two young, hippie-ish kids. Now, here's the thing. This book was written in 1967 when they were hippies, but it takes place in 1981. Pretty sure it's 81. Yeah, it's a Sardin Planet thing, but the future's involved there. There's an evil Oriental villain from Tibet who kidnaps Laurel Ponder and Red Cornish on a flying saucer, and they both, scream at him, making hippie speeches about how we could have shiny rainbow future cities if it wasn't for awful people like him. There are people, dropping out and having love-ins and stuff, and it's like, so this guy who'd been alive this long and had been writing for this long just thinks that progress is going to freeze in 1967 and continue for the next 14 years. Minor. The main fact is the book's terrible. It keeps switching point of view. At one point, there's a conversation between molecules. There's several chapters where the narrative is taken over by Psychic Cat. It completely bungles it. It attempted so many different genres and failed at all of them. Try one thing, guys. Speaking of crap, John F. Carr's The Ophidian Conspiracy. Oddly enough, the same friend that I read some of those other books with also read this independently of me many years ago. So this is a 1970s planet adventure thing. So this has, lizard people conspiracy. It's a beloved old theme, and there's actual conspiracy theorists who think this is real. Far future, like there are these genetically engineered lizard people who have this planet. They once conquered the universe, and somebody's there's this evil group of cyborg monks that are trying to give them power to somehow manipulate the universe more in their favor. And there's this secret agent character and would-be girlfriend character, and they have an adversarial relationship at first, and they go to the planet undercover, and there's something about his mind juice was swapped out. This is another one that cuts back and forth between many things. The result is that we do get a kind of a narrative, but the main characters never do anything. They are just caught up in it. Nothing interesting especially ever happens to them. They never seem to be really in danger. Percy Greg's Across the Zodiac, Story of the Wrecked Record. This is actually abridged. And I'm going to tell you something. I'm glad it's abridged after having attempted to read it. Because this book is almost 400 pages long. Apparently the original 600. This was written in the 1880s, and I was very fascinated because it's an early Sword and Planet thing, like Edgar Rice Burroughs and many others. Edward Arnold's Gulliver of Mars, and I'm like, this is going to be one of those books that started it all. Some of those books that started it all aren't so great, I'm finding out. I've read a lot of 19th century stuff now at this point, and I don't have a problem with the language. Purple prose can be delightful. It can really carry it along sometimes. It can add flavor. This, however, this is not an adventure book. And it's not really science fiction or fantasy either. This is a political rant in the form of a science fiction book. Everything that happens on that planet is there to set an example for these effed up, super reactionary ideas that Percy Greg had. In the late 19th century, you had a lot of people, a lot of intellectual type people who were socialists, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with it. Percy Greg thought there was something wrong with it, and so he wrote this book, basically, and so this guy makes his own spaceship out of concrete. It takes way too long to get to Mars. It takes 50 pages. He's got a garden in the spaceship that he fertilizes with his own feces. Gets to Mars, meets some Martians, learns the language right quick, just like in Edgar Rice Burroughs, but rather than whipping out a sword and having a sweet adventure, he never does this, by the way. I mean, there's some sword stuff, but there's no sweet adventure at all. An old man takes him aside and says, "Now, son, Mars is kind of effed up. I mean, there's good stuff now, but we have atheism, and that's the worst thing in the world. It's the worst thing in the world, just like communism is the worst thing in the world. It's the worst thing in the world, just like feminism and lesbian are the worst things in the world. These things are all terrible, son." And he takes a wife, and he's all like, "I don't know, honey, what do you want to do?" And she starts crying like, "You're the man, you have to decide, you're the man." This conversation plays out 4 or 5 different times. It's terrible. Percy Greg is a terrible person. I'm glad he's dead. This may be the worst book ever. This is Peter Lyle's Roland of My Room. It is the only book by Peter Lyle, as near as I've been able to determine. It's an Avon book. It's copyrighted to Peter Lyle. Yeah, he doesn't exist apart from this book. You just look him up, you find this book. Well, a lot of the reviews online will say what I'm about to say now, is that, so there's a sweet cover there, right? You see this shirtless guy in tight pants with a bloody sword, wearing a crown, it's like, I don't know if he's got a tattoo there or what. There's a dead guy in some steps, there's an overturned cauldron, there's ships and swords and an evil wizard and a glowing flower, and you're like, oh man, this, Conan type badass dude is going to do some sweet adventure-y tomfoolery in this super detailed otherworld or Hyborian age or whatever. No, it's not about any of that. This cover is a complete deception. This is this lengthy poem that's at the beginning and the end. Roland is a whiny prince in a fantasy kingdom that we don't really know that all that much about. They're in this castle by the sea. And there's a prophecy that he's going to have to duel his brother and kill him and take the throne, his twin brother. And so he's really whiny and angsty about that. He's supposed to be like 14 or whatever. And it's like, well, I guess that would suck. And at one point it's like, oh, maybe I'll run away. Oh, no, I'll go home. Whoops. Oh, it all played out just like they said. My dad's an asshole. He may kill my brother. I want to kill my dad. It's like, too late. Your dad killed himself. But shit sucks. It's like, yeah, well, the kingdom's fucked up. This is enemy country. He's like, no. He stamps his foot. I want to go to sea. And there's an enemy cult aboard the ship, and nothing all that much happens. He's really ineffectual and does nothing. And I'm just going to blow the ending. He just up and dies. This is not an adventure. It's not really a fantasy. It's essentially a cruel trick perpetrated on the reader. This book is basically designed to make you want to kill yourself. Now, I'm not really knocking things that are depressing because, you could go Poe, you can go Clark Ashton Smith, you can do something, you could go, Victor Hugo or there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But when you're presenting something as an entertainment, as a fantasy, as an action thing, something like this, you gotta give them something. Like there's no romance, there's no horror, there's no excitement. This is like 170 pages of negative emotion. This book is a bummer. This is a bummer in book form. I really, really hate this book. In my review on Goodreads, I said if I hadn't been reading other books at the same time I was reading this, I might have just up and killed myself. It's really bad. Okay, and again, we're gonna end on a sprightly note right here. Here's everybody's favorite Clive Cussler, author of the films Sahara and Raise the Titanic. Those both have in common that Clive Cussler wasn't very satisfied with the results. He was reluctant to have his books made into films, and I don't know why he was so upset, because his actual book is far worse than any screen adaptation. This is his first, I don't know if it's his first book ever, but it's the first Dirk Pitt book that got published. I think this is the 73. This is the Mediterranean Caper. Beware the word caper. Anything with that in it, you're in for it. Catalina Caper, like all those heist things. Like look at that son of a bitch, all huge in the back here. I sold 1 million books. I named my kid Dirk. This is garbage. This book really is genre garbage. It does not deliver on its promises. So it's not really keen spy stuff. It's not really great adventure stuff. It's just smug bullshit. Dirk Pitt is a terrible rapist. Goes around shirtless, flexing muscles. At one point he sneaks around this ship naked. I don't know what we were supposed to get out of this or who was supposed to relate to this, but if you've ever seen the old Popeye cartoons, the character of Dirk Pitt in this book reminded me of nothing so much as Bluto. Bluto, who, by the way, was the villain in those cartoons. Something about a retired German World War I flying ace type guy who has a castle. It's implied he kills people in a labyrinth. There's some drug smuggling business. There's all these plot things that are sort of off screen. But what actually happens in the book is not necessarily nothing, but next to nothing. All the action are isolated episodes. I think the only honest-to-God fight scene that takes place in the book, it turns out that the people he's fighting are on his side, so it's like it was just like a comic turn. Lengthy epilogue. This book is crap. Also, there's the climax where all suspense is deflated almost immediately when the hero reveals that he's already outwitted the villain. I don't know if that's a spoiler or not, but I don't know why people bought this book. I don't know why people bought so many sequels to it. I don't know why there's 150 million Clive Cussler novels in print. Anyway. That is my wall of shame. These are the books that I hate more than anything else that I've read previously. I still have. There's actually 2 books that are not in here currently. They're actually on loan to a friend. These may also be divisive. One of them is by John Wyndham. He wrote A Day of the Triffids. The book Stowaway to Mars, aka Planet Plane, is among the worst I've ever read, but I don't have it here, so I'm not going to talk at length about it. The other one, actually a Leslie Charteris book. It's one of the Saint series, like with Roger Moore and Val Kilmer or whatever else. That's the 3rd book in the series, The Last Hero. If I had it here, I'd tell you about it. I hate these books. To take a page from Roger Ebert, who I also don't much care for.